This is a continuation of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, comprising parts 3 and 4. Part 3. The Cliff's Reel. The Aquilonian host was drawn up, long serried lines of pikemen and horsemen in gleaming steel, when a giant figure in black armor emerged from the royal pavilion, and as he swung up into the saddle of the black stallion held by 4 squires, a roar that shook the mountains went up from the host. They shook their blades and thundered forth their acclaim of their warrior king. Knights in gold-chased armor, pikemen in mail coats and bassinets, archers in their leather jerkins, with their longbows in their left hand. The host on the opposite side of the valley was in motion, trotting down the long, gentle slope toward the river. Their steel shone through the mists of morning that swirled about their horses' feet. The Aquilonian host moved leisurely to meet them. The measured tramp of the armored horses made the ground tremble. Banners flung out long, silken folds in the morning wind. Lances swayed like a bristling forest, dipped and sank, their pennons fluttering about them. 10 men-at-arms, grim, taciturn veterans who could hold their tongues, guarded the royal pavilion. One squire stood in the tent, peering out through a slit in the doorway. But, for the handful in the secret, no one else in the vast host knew that it was not Conan who rode on the great stallion at the head of the army. The Aquilonian host had assumed the customary formation. The strongest part was the center, composed entirely of heavily armed knights. The wings were made up of smaller bodies of horsemen, mounted men-at-arms, mostly, supported by pikemen and archers. The latter were Bosonians from the western marches, strongly built men of medium stature, in leathern jackets and iron headpieces. The Nemedian army came on in similar formation, and the 2 hosts moved toward the river, the wings in advance of the centers. In the center of the Aquilonian host, the great lion banner streamed its billowing black folds over the steel-clad figure on the black stallion. But on his dais in the royal pavilion, Conan groaned in anguish of spirit and cursed with strange heathen oaths. "The hosts move together," quoth the squire, watching from the door. "Hear the trumpets peal. Ha! The rising sun strikes fire from lance heads and helmets until I am dazzled. It turns the river crimson. Aye, it will be truly crimson before this day is done. The foe have reached the river. Now arrows fly between the hosts like stinging clouds that hide the sun. Ha! Well loosed, bowmen. The Bosonians have the better of it. Hark to them shout." Faintly in the ears of the king, above the din of trumpets and clanging steel, came the deep, fierce shout of the Bosonians as they drew and loosed in perfect unison. "Their archers seek to hold ours in play while their knights ride into the river," said the squire. "The banks are not steep. They slope to the water's edge. The knights come on. They crash through the willows. By Mitra, the cloth-yard shafts find every crevice of their harness. Horses and men go down, struggling and thrashing in the water. It is not deep, nor is the current swift, but men are drowning there, dragged under by their armor, and trampled by the frantic horses. Now the knights of Aquilonia advance. They ride into the water and engage the knights of Nemedia. The water swirls about their horses' bellies, and the clang of sword against sword is deafening." "Crom!" burst in agony from Conan's lips. Life was coursing sluggishly back into his veins, but still he could not lift his mighty frame from the dais. "The wings close in," said the squire. "Pikemen and swordsmen fight hand to hand in the stream, and behind them the bowmen ply their shafts. By Mitra, the Nemedian arbalesters are sorely harried, and the Bosonians arch their arrows to drop amid the rear ranks. Their center gains not a foot, and their wings are pushed back up from the stream again." "Crom, Ymir, and Mitra!" raged Conan. "Gods and devils! Could I but reach the fighting, if but to die at the first blow." Outside through the long, hot day the battle stormed and thundered. The valley shook to charge and countercharge, to the whistling of shafts and the crash of rending shields and splintering lances. But the hosts of Aquilonia held fast. Once they were forced back from the bank, but a countercharge, with the black banner flowing over the black stallion, regained the lost ground. And like an iron rampart, they held the right bank of the stream, and at last the squire gave Conan the news that the Nemedians were falling back from the river. "Their wings are in confusion," he cried. "Their knights reel back from the sword play. But what is this? Your banner is in motion. The center sweeps into the stream. By Mitra, Valanis is leading the host across the river. Fool, groaned Conan. It may be a trick. He should hold his position. By dawn, Prospero will be here with the Poetanian levies. The knights ride into a hail of arrows, cried the squire. But they do not falter. They sweep on. They have crossed. They charge up the slope. Palantides has hurled the wings across the river to their support. It is all he can do. The lion banner dips and staggers above the melee. The knights of Nemedia make a stand. They are broken. They fall back. Their left wing is in full flight, and our pikemen cut them down as they run. I see Valanis riding and smiting like a madman. He is carried beyond himself by the fighting lust. Men no longer look to Palantides. They follow Valanis, deeming him Conan as he rides with closed visor. But look, there is method in his madness. He swings wide of the Nemedian front with 5,000 knights, the pick of the army. The main host of the Nemedians is in confusion. And look, their flank is protected by the cliffs, but there is a defile left unguarded. It is like a great cleft in the wall that opens again behind the Nemedian lines. By Mitra, Valanis sees and seizes the opportunity. He has driven their wing before him, and he leads his knights toward that defile. They swing wide of the main battle. They cut through a line of spearmen. They charge into the defile. "An ambush!" cried Conan, striving to struggle upright. "No!" shouted the squire exultantly. "The whole Nemedian host is in full sight. They have forgotten the defile. They never expected to be pushed back that far. Oh, fool, fool Tarascus, to make such a blunder. Ah, I see lances and pennons pouring from the farther mouth of the defile, beyond the Nemedian lines. They will smite those ranks from the rear and crumple them. Mitra, what is this?" He staggered as the walls of the tent swayed drunkenly. Afar over the thunder of the fight rose a deep bellowing roar, indescribably ominous. "The cliffs reel!" shrieked the squire. "Ah, gods, what is this? The river foams out of its channel, and the peaks are crumbling. The ground shakes, and horses and riders in armor are overthrown. The cliffs are falling." With his words there came a grinding rumble and a thunderous concussion, and the ground trembled. Over the roar of the battle sounded screams of mad terror. "The cliffs have crumbled!" cried the livid squire. "They have thundered down into the defile and crushed every living creature in it. I saw the lion banner wave an instant amid the dust and falling stones, and then it vanished. Ha! The Nemedians shout with triumph. Well may they shout, for the fall of the cliffs has wiped out 5,000 of our bravest knights. Hark! To Conan's ears came a vast torrent of sound, rising and rising in frenzy. "The king is dead! The king is dead! Flee! Flee! The king is dead!" "Liars!" panted Conan. "Dogs! Knaves! Cowards! Oh, Chrome, if I could but stand, but crawl to the river with my sword in my teeth. How, boy, do they flee!" "Aye," sobbed the squire. "They spur for the river. They are broken, hurled on like spume before a storm. I see Palantides striving to stem the torrent. He is down, and the horses trample him. They rush into the river, knights, bowmen, pikemen, all mixed and mingled in one mad torrent of destruction. The Nemedians are on their heels, cutting them down like corn. "But they will make a stand on this side of the river," cried the king. With an effort that brought the sweat dripping from his temples, he heaved himself up on his elbows. "Nay," cried the squire, "they cannot. They are broken, routed. O gods, that I should live to see this day." Then he remembered his duty and shouted to the men-at-arms who stood stolidly watching the flight of their comrades. "Get a horse, swiftly, and help me lift the king upon it. We dare not bide here." But before they could do his bidding, the first drift of the storm was upon them. Knights and spearmen and archers fled among the tents, stumbling over ropes and baggage, and mingled with them were Nemedian riders who smote right and left at all alien figures. Tent ropes were cut, fire sprang up in 100 places, and the plundering had already begun. The grim guardsmen about Conan's tent died where they stood, smiting and thrusting, and over their mangled corpses beat the hoofs of the conquerors. But the squire had drawn the flap close, and in the confused madness of the slaughter, none realized that the pavilion held an occupant. So the flight and the pursuit swept past and roared away up the valley, and the squire looked out presently to see a cluster of men approaching the royal tent with evident purpose. "Here comes the king of Nemedia with 4 companions and his squire," quoth he. "He will accept your surrender, my fair lord." "Surrender the devil's heart," gritted the king. He had forced himself up to a sitting posture. He swung his legs painfully off the dais and staggered upright, reeling drunkenly. The squire ran to assist him, but Conan pushed him away. "Give me that bow," he gritted, indicating a long bow and quiver that hung from a tent pole. "But your majesty," cried the squire in great perturbation, "the battle is lost. It were the part of majesty to yield with the dignity becoming one of royal blood." "I have no royal blood," ground Conan. "I am a barbarian and the son of a blacksmith." Wrenching away the bow and an arrow, he staggered toward the opening of the pavilion. So formidable was his appearance, naked but for short leather breeks and sleeveless shirt, open to reveal his great hairy chest, with his huge limbs and his blue eyes blazing under his tangled black mane, that the squire shrank back, more afraid of his king than of the whole Nemedian host. Reeling on wide-braced legs, Conan drunkenly tore the door flap open and staggered out under the canopy. The king of Nemedia and his companions had dismounted, and they halted short, staring in wonder at the apparition confronting them. "Here I am, you jackals!" roared the Cimmerian. "I am the king. Death to you, dog brothers!" He jerked the arrow to its head and loosed, and the shaft feathered itself in the breast of the knight who stood beside Tarascus. Conan hurled the bow at the king of Nemedia. "Curse my shaky hand! Come in and take me if you dare!" Reeling backward on unsteady legs, he fell with his shoulders against a tent pole, and propped upright, he lifted his great sword with both hands. "By Mitra, it is the king!" swore Tarascus. He cast a swift look about him and laughed. That other was a jackal in his harness. "In, dogs, and take his head." The 3 soldiers, men-at-arms wearing the emblem of the royal guards, rushed at the king, and one felled the squire with a blow of a mace. The other 2 fared less well. As the first rushed in, lifting his sword, Conan met him with a sweeping stroke that severed mail links like cloth and sheared the Nemedian's arm and shoulder clean from his body. His corpse, pitching backward, fell across his companion's legs. The man stumbled, and before he could recover, the great sword was through him. Conan wrenched out his steel with a racking gasp and staggered back against the tent pole. His great limbs trembled, his chest heaved, and sweat poured down his face and neck. But his eyes flamed with exultant savagery, and he panted, "Why do you stand afar off, dog of Belverus? I can't reach you. Come in and die." Tarascus hesitated, glanced at the remaining man-at-arms and his squire, a gaunt, saturnine man in black mail, and took a step forward. He was far inferior in size and strength to the giant Cimmerian, but he was in full armor, and was famed in all the western nations as a swordsman. But his squire caught his arm. "Nay, your majesty, do not throw away your life. I will summon archers to shoot this barbarian as we shoot lions." Neither of them had noticed that a chariot had approached while the fight was going on, and now came to a halt before them. But Conan saw, looking over their shoulders, and a queer chill sensation crawled along his spine. There was something vaguely unnatural about the appearance of the black horses that drew the vehicle, but it was the occupant of the chariot that arrested the king's attention. He was a tall man, superbly built, clad in a long, unadorned silk robe. He wore a Shemitish headdress, and its lower folds hid his features, except for the dark, magnetic eyes. The hands that grasped the reins, pulling the rearing horses back on their haunches, were white but strong. Conan glared at the stranger, all his primitive instincts roused. He sensed an aura of menace and power that exuded from this veiled figure, a menace as definite as the windless waving of tall grass that marks the path of the serpent. "Hail, Zaltoten!" exclaimed Tarascus. "Here is the king of Aquilonia. He did not die in the landslide as we thought." "I know," answered the other, without bothering to say how he knew. "What is your present intention?" "I will summon the archers to slay him," answered the Nemedian. "As long as he lives, he will be dangerous to us." "Yet even a dog has uses," answered Zaltoten. "Take him alive." Conan laughed raspingly. "Come in and try," he challenged. "But for my treacherous legs, I'd hew you out of that chariot like a woodman hewing a tree. But you'll never take me alive, damn you." "He speaks the truth, I fear," said Tarascus. "The man is a barbarian, with the senseless ferocity of a wounded tiger. Let me summon the archers." "Watch me and learn wisdom," advised Zaltoten. His hand dipped into his robe and came out with something shining, a glistening sphere. This he threw suddenly at Conan. The Cimmerian contemptuously struck it aside with his sword. At the instant of contact, there was a sharp explosion, a flare of white, blinding flame, and Conan pitched senseless to the ground. "He is dead?" Tarascus' tone was more assertion than inquiry. "Number? He is but senseless. He will recover his senses in a few hours. Bid your men bind his arms and legs and lift him into my chariot." With a gesture, Tarascus did so, and they heaved the senseless king into the chariot, grunting with their burden. Zaltotun threw a velvet cloak over his body, completely covering him from any who might peer in. He gathered the reins in his hands. "I'm for Belverus," he said. "Tell Amalric that I will be with him if he needs me. But with Conan out of the way, and his army broken, lance and sword should suffice for the rest of the conquest. Prospero cannot be bringing more than 10,000 men to the field, and will doubtless fall back to Tarantia when he hears the news of the battle. Say nothing to Amalric or Valerius or anyone about our capture. Let them think Conan died in the fall of the cliffs." He looked at the man-at-arms for a long space, until the guardsman moved restlessly, nervous under the scrutiny. "What is that about your waist?" Zaltotun demanded. "Why, my girdle? May it please you, my lord," stuttered the amazed guardsman. "You lie!" Zaltotun's laugh was merciless as a sword edge. "It is a poisonous serpent. What a fool you are, to wear a reptile about your waist." With distended eyes the man looked down, and to his utter horror he saw the buckle of his girdle rear up at him. It was a snake's head. He saw the evil eyes and the dripping fangs, heard the hiss, and felt the loathsome contact of the thing about his body. He screamed hideously and struck at it with his naked hand, felt its fangs flesh themselves in that hand, and then he stiffened and fell heavily. Tarascus looked down at him without expression. He saw only the leathern girdle and the buckle, the pointed tongue of which was stuck in the guardsman's palm. Zaltotun turned his hypnotic gaze on Tarascus' squire, and the man turned ashen and began to tremble. But the king interposed. "Nay, we can trust him." The sorcerer tautened the reins and swung the horses around. "See that this piece of work remains secret. If I am needed, let Altaro, Orastes' servant, summon me as I have taught him. I will be in your palace at Belverus." Tarascus lifted his hand in salutation, but his expression was not pleasant to see as he looked after the departing mesmerist. "Why should he spare the Cimmerian?" whispered the frightened squire. "That I am wondering myself," grunted Tarascus. Behind the rumbling chariot, the dull roar of battle and pursuit faded in the distance. The setting sun rimmed the cliffs with scarlet flame, and the chariot moved into the vast blue shadows floating up out of the east. Part 4. From What Hell Have You Crawled? Of that long ride in the chariot of Zaltotun, Conan knew nothing. He lay like a dead man while the bronze wheels clashed over the stones of mountain roads and swished through the deep grass of fertile valleys, and finally dropping down from the rugged heights, rumbled rhythmically along the broad white road that winds through the rich meadowlands to the walls of Belverus. Just before dawn, some faint reviving of life touched him. He heard a mumble of voices, the groan of ponderous hinges. Through a slit in the cloak that covered him, he saw, faintly in the lurid glare of torches, the great black arch of a gateway, and the bearded faces of men-at-arms, the torches striking fire from their spearheads and helmets. "How went the battle, my fair lord?" spoke an eager voice in the Nemedian tongue. "Well indeed," was the curt reply. "The king of Aquilonia lies slain, and his host is broken." A babble of excited voices rose, drowned the next instant by the whirling wheels of the chariot on the flags. Sparks flashed from under the revolving rims as Zaltotun lashed his steeds through the arch. But Conan heard one of the guardsmen mutter, "From beyond the border to Belverus between sunset and dawn, and the horses scarcely sweating. By Mitra, they—" Then silence drank the voices, and there was only the clatter of hooves and wheels along the shadowy street. What he had heard registered itself on Conan's brain, but suggested nothing to him. He was like a mindless automaton that hears and sees, but does not understand. Sights and sounds flowed meaninglessly about him. He lapsed again into a deep lethargy, and was only dimly aware when the chariot halted in a deep, high-walled court, and he was lifted from it by many hands and borne up a winding stone stair, and down a long, dim corridor. Whispers, stealthy footsteps, unrelated sounds surged or rustled about him, irrelevant and far away. Yet his ultimate awakening was abrupt and crystal clear. He possessed full knowledge of the battle in the mountains and its sequences, and he had a good idea of where he was. He lay on a velvet couch, clad as he was the day before, but with his limbs loaded with chains not even he could break. The room in which he lay was furnished with somber magnificence, the walls covered with black velvet tapestries, the floor with heavy purple carpets. There was no sign of door or window, and one curiously carven gold lamp, swinging from the fretted ceiling, shed a lurid light over all. In that light, the figure seated in a silver, throne-like chair before him seemed unreal and fantastic, with an elusiveness of outline that was heightened by a filmy silken robe. But the features were distinct, unnaturally so in that uncertain light. It was almost as if a weird nimbus played about the man's head, casting the bearded face into bold relief so that it was the only definite and distinct reality in that mystic, ghostly chamber. It was a magnificent face with strongly chiseled features of classical beauty. There was, indeed, something disquieting about the calm tranquility of its aspect, a suggestion of more than human knowledge, of a profound certitude beyond human assurance. Also, an uneasy sensation of familiarity twitched at the back of Conan's consciousness. He had never seen this man's face before, he well knew. Yet those features reminded him of something, or someone. It was like encountering in the flesh some dream image that had haunted one in nightmares. "Who are you?" demanded the king belligerently, struggling to a sitting position in spite of his chains. "Men call me Zaltotun," was the reply, in a strong golden voice. "What place is this?" the Cimmerian next demanded. "A chamber in the palace of King Tarascus, in Belverus." Conan was not surprised. Belverus, the capital, was at the same time the largest Nemedian city so near the border. "And where's Tarascus?" "With the army." "Well," growled Conan, "if you mean to murder me, why don't you do it and get it over with?" "I did not save you from the king's archers to murder you in Belverus," answered Zaltotun. "What the devil did you do to me?" demanded Conan. "I blasted your consciousness," answered Zaltotun. "How, you would not understand. Call it black magic if you will." Conan had already reached that conclusion and was mulling over something else. "I think I understand why you spared my life," he rumbled. "Amalric wants to keep me as a check on Valerius, in case the impossible happens and he becomes king of Aquilonia. It's well known that the Baron of Tor is behind this move to seat Valerius on my throne. And if I know Amalric, he doesn't intend that Valerius shall be anything more than a figurehead, as Tarascus is now." "Amalric knows nothing of your capture," answered Zaltotun. "Neither does Valerius. Both think you died at Valkia." Conan's eyes narrowed as he stared at the man in silence. "I sensed a brain behind all this," he muttered, "but I thought it was Amalric's. Are Amalric, Tarascus, and Valerius all but puppets dancing on your string? Who are you?" "What does it matter? If I told you, you would not believe me. What if I told you I might set you back on the throne of Aquilonia?" Conan's eyes burned on him like a wolf. "What's your price?" "Obedience to me." "Go to hell with your offer," snarled Conan. "I'm no figurehead. I won my crown with my sword. Besides, it's beyond your power to buy and sell the throne of Aquilonia at your will. The kingdom's not conquered. One battle doesn't decide a war." "You war against more than swords," answered Zaltotun. "Was it a mortal sword that felled you in your tent before the fight? Nay, it was a child of the dark, a waif of outer space, whose fingers were afire with the frozen coldness of the black gulfs, which froze the blood in your veins and the marrow of your thews. Coldness so cold, it burned your flesh like white-hot iron. Was it chance that led the man who wore your harness to lead his knights into the defile? Chance that brought the cliffs crashing down upon them?" Conan glared at him unspeaking, feeling a chill along his spine. Wizards and sorcerers abounded in his barbaric mythology, and any fool could tell that this was no common man. Conan sensed an inexplicable something about him that set him apart, an alien aura of time and space, a sense of tremendous and sinister antiquity. But his stubborn spirit refused to flinch. "The fall of the cliffs was chance," he muttered truculently. "The charge into the defile was what any man would have done." "Not so. You would not have led a charge into it. You would have suspected a trap. You would never have crossed the river in the first place, until you were sure the Nemedian route was real. Hypnotic suggestions would not have invaded your mind, even in the madness of battle, to make you mad, and rush blindly into the trap laid for you, as it did the lesser man, who masqueraded as you. Then, if this was all planned, Conan grunted skeptically, all a plot to trap my host, why did not the child of darkness kill me in my tent? Because I wished to take you alive. It took no wizardry to predict that Palantides would send another man out in your harness. I wanted you alive and unhurt. You may fit into my scheme of things. There is a vital power about you greater than the craft and cunning of my allies. You are a bad enemy, but might make a fine vassal. Conan spat savagely at the word, and Zaltotin, ignoring his fury, took a crystal globe from a nearby table and placed it before him. He did not support it in any way, nor place it on anything, but it hung motionless in midair, as solidly as if it rested on an iron pedestal. Conan snorted at this bit of necromancy, but he was nevertheless impressed. "Would you know of what goes on in Aquilonia?" he asked. Conan did not reply, but the sudden rigidity of his form betrayed his interest. Zaltotun stared into the cloudy depths and spoke. "It is now the evening of the day after the Battle of Valkia. Last night the main body of the army camped by Valkia, while squadrons of knights harried the fleeing Aquilonians. At dawn, the host broke camp and pushed westward through the mountains. Prospero, with 10,000 Poetanians, was miles from the battlefield when he met the fleeing survivors in the early dawn. He had pushed on all night, hoping to reach the field before the battle joined. Unable to rally the remnants of the broken host, he fell back toward Tarantia. Riding hard, replacing his wearied horses with steeds seized from the countryside, he approaches Tarantia. I see his weary knights, their armor gray with dust, their pennons drooping as they push their tired horses through the plain. I see also the streets of Tarantia. The city is in turmoil. Somehow, word has reached the people of the defeat and the death of King Conan. The mob is mad with fear, crying out that the king is dead, and there is none to lead them against the Nemedians. Giant shadows rush on Aquilonia from the east, and the sky is black with vultures." Conan cursed deeply. "What are these but words? The raggedest beggar in the street might prophesy as much. If you say you saw all that in the glass ball, then you're a liar, as well as a knave, of which last there's no doubt. Prospero will hold Tarantia, and the barons will rally to him. Count Trocero of Poitan commands the kingdom in my absence, and he'll drive these Nemedian dogs howling back to their kennels. What are 50,000 Nemedians? Aquilonia will swallow them up. They'll never see Belvaris again. It's not Aquilonia which was conquered at Valkia, it was only Conan." "Aquilonia is doomed," answered Zaltotun, unmoved. "Lance and axe and torch shall conquer her. Or if they fail, powers from the dark of ages shall march against her. As the cliffs fell at Valkia, so shall walled cities and mountains fall, if the need arise, and rivers roar from their channels to drown whole provinces. Better if steel and bowstring prevail without further aid from the arts, for the constant use of mighty spells sometimes sets forces in motion that might rock the universe." "From what hell have you crawled, you knighted dog?" muttered Conan, staring at the man. The Cimmerian involuntarily shivered. He sensed something incredibly ancient, incredibly evil. Zaltotun lifted his head, as if listening to whispers across the void. He seemed to have forgotten his prisoner. Then he shook his head impatiently and glanced impersonally at Conan. "What? Why, if I told you, you would not believe me. But I am wearied of conversation with you. It is less fatiguing to destroy a walled city than it is to frame my thoughts in words a brainless barbarian can understand." "If my hands were free," opined Conan, "I'd soon make a brainless corpse out of you." "I do not doubt it, if I were fool enough to give you the opportunity," answered Zaltotun, clapping his hands. His manner had changed. There was impatience in his tone, and a certain nervousness in his manner, though Conan did not think this attitude was in any way connected with himself. "Consider what I have told you, barbarian," said Zaltotun. "You will have plenty of leisure. I have not yet decided what I shall do with you. It depends on circumstances yet unborn. But let this be impressed upon you, that if I decide to use you in my game, it will be better to submit without resistance than to suffer my wrath." Conan spat a curse at him, just as hangings that masked a door swung apart and 4 giant Negroes entered. Each was clad only in a silken breechcloth, supported by a girdle, from which hung a great key. Zaltotun gestured impatiently toward the king and turned away, as if dismissing the matter entirely from his mind. His fingers twitched queerly. From a carven green jade box, he took a handful of shimmering black dust and placed it in a brazier which stood on a golden tripod at his elbow. The crystal globe, which he seemed to have forgotten, fell suddenly to the floor, as if its invisible support had been removed. Then the blacks had lifted Conan, for so loaded with chains was he that he could not walk, and carried him from the chamber. A glance back, before the heavy gold-bound teak door was closed, showed him Zaltotun leaning back in his throne-like chair, his arms folded, while a thin wisp of smoke curled up from the brazier. Conan's scalp prickled. In Stygia, that ancient and evil kingdom that lay far to the south, he had seen such black dust before. It was the pollen of the black lotus, which creates death-like sleep and monstrous dreams, and he knew that only the grisly wizards of the Black Ring, which is the nadir of evil, voluntarily seek the scarlet nightmares of the Black Lotus to revive their necromantic powers. The Black Ring was a fable and a lie to most folk of the Western world, but Conan knew of its ghastly reality and its grim votaries who practiced their abominable sorceries amid the black vaults of Stygia and the nighted domes of accursed Sabbatea. He glanced back at the cryptic gold-bound door, shuddering at what it hid. Whether it was day or night, the king could not tell. The palace of King Tarascus seemed a shadowy, nighted place that shunned natural illumination. The spirit of darkness and shadow hovered over it, and that spirit, Conan felt, was embodied in the stranger Zaltotun. The Negroes carried the king along a winding corridor so dimly lighted that they moved through it like black ghosts bearing a dead man, and down a stone stair that wound endlessly. A torch in the hand of one cast the great deformed shadows streaming along the wall. It was like the descent into hell of a corpse borne by dusky demons. At last, they reached the foot of the stair, and then they traversed a long, straight corridor, with a blank wall on one hand, pierced by an occasional arched doorway, with a stair leading up behind it, and on the other hand another wall showing heavy barred doors at regular intervals of a few feet. Halting before one of these doors, one of the blacks produced the key that hung at his girdle and turned it in the lock. Then, pushing open the grill, they entered with their captive. They were in a small dungeon with heavy stone walls, floor, and ceiling, and in the opposite wall there was another grilled door. What lay beyond that door, Conan could not tell, but he did not believe it was another corridor. The glimmering light of the torch, flickering through the bars, hinted at shadowy spaciousness and echoing depths. In one corner of the dungeon, near the door through which they had entered, a cluster of rusty chains hung from a great iron ring set in the stone. In these chains, a skeleton dangled. Conan glared at it with some curiosity, noticing the state of the bare bones, most of which were splintered and broken. The skull, which had fallen from the vertebrae, was crushed as if by some savage blow of tremendous force. Stolidly, one of the blacks, not the one who had opened the door, removed the chains from the ring, using his key on the massive lock, and dragged the mass of rusty metal and shattered bones over to one side. Then they fastened Conan's chains to that ring, and the third black turned his key in the lock of the farther door, grunting when he had assured himself that it was properly fastened. Then they regarded Conan cryptically, slit-eyed ebony giants, the torch striking highlights from their glossy skin. He who held the key to the nearer door was moved to remark, gutturally, "This your palace now, White Dog King? None but master, and we know. All palace sleep. We keep secret. You live and die here, maybe, like him." He contemptuously kicked the shattered skull and sent it clattering across the stone floor. Conan did not deign to reply to the taunt, and the black, galled perhaps by his prisoner's silence, muttered a curse, stooped, and spat full in the king's face. It was an unfortunate move for the black. Conan was seated on the floor, the chains about his waist, ankles and wrists locked to the ring in the wall. He could neither rise nor move more than a yard out from the wall, but there was considerable slack in the chains that shackled his wrists, and before the bullet-shaped head could be withdrawn out of reach, the king gathered this slack in his mighty hand and smote the black on the head. The man fell like a butchered ox, and his comrades stared to see him lying with his scalp laid open, and blood oozing from his nose and ears. But they attempted no reprisal, nor did they accept Conan's urgent invitation to approach within reach of the bloody chain in his hand. Presently, grunting in their ape-like speech, they lifted the senseless black and bore him out like a sack of wheat, arms and legs dangling. They used his key to lock the door behind them, but did not remove it from the gold chain that fastened it to his girdle. They took the torch with them, and as they moved up the corridor, the darkness slunk behind them like an animate thing. Their soft, padding footsteps died away, with the glimmer of their torch, and darkness and silence remained unchallenged. This concludes the second part of 12 total of The Hour of the Dragon, also known as Conan the Conqueror, by Robert E. Howard, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.